What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another video. And for those of you that have been subscribed to my channel for a hot minute, there was a video, kind of like a one-off that I did to kind of gauge interest in something like this. And it was going over why people don't play Jace Vryn's Prodigy really in any format anymore. And it actually was relatively popular. I'm not exactly sure, like the stats of the video. The last time I checked it, I mean, it was very popular, with some of my other videos that I posted. I don't think nearly as popular as like some of the what happened to decks that I've posted in the past like few months. But I wanted to bring it back because I felt like the reception was relatively positive, and I think it would be worth my time, making videos, especially on some cards that are a little bit more interesting, like this card that we have right here, Siege Rhino. And I kind of wanted to change up the format a little bit of this as well, kind of going more in depth than I did with like Jace and stuff. So yeah, that's going to be what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about Siege Rhino and kind of the rise and fall of this card because if you played Standard slash just Magic in general back in late 2014 into the 2015s, Siege Rhino was a very, very, very important card to especially like the Standard metagame and kind of shifts in the modern metagame because back then we didn't have Pioneer. People were trying to make up formats and stuff that were kind of know as Pioneer today, but really didn't exist back then. So, of course, before we get too deep into it, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when I post videos like this. I mainly do a lot of content based on the modern and Pioneer formats, so if that's something of interest to you, you can go ahead and subscribe, ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. There's also two links in the description of this video. One goes to the Discord server. Go ahead, follow that link to the Discord server, join so we can talk about Magic, ask me questions, etc., so on and so forth. There's also a link to my Twitch channel as well, so you can get notifications when I go live over on Twitch. So, Siege Rhino. This card was either an absolute menace or your best friend back in the day. Back when people played Standard, and I mean like a lot of people played Standard, that was like really a lot of like the preferred format. Siege Rhino was an absolute menace to society. In its debut Pro Tour, I believe it had like three of the four decks in the top eight were Obzon decks, and I think there was like four or five like in the top eight. And Siege Rhino played kind of this role in the few different like styles of Obzon that we saw in the format. So really during that time you had like these like mid-range decks, control decks, and even aggro decks in this color combination because you had some very aggressive creatures like the Abzan like clan leader in this and Offenza. So Siege Rhino definitely with like its stats as you can see on screen here. 4 mana 4/5 with trample, and when it entered the battlefield your opponent lost 3 life and you gain 3 life. So Siege Rhino was in this weird spot where it was aggressive based on stats. I mean, 4 mana 4/5 trampler, and it also played defense very well. Like it didn't have to attack. Like it just comes into play, it buffers your life total a little bit, and probably like gets a 2-for-1. Trading itself for one of your opponent's like spells in their hand plus one of their creatures in combat if they're any one of the many like non black based decks that were in the format, and also just again like when the game was like out of reach, like this was a good top deck too. Again, buffering your life total. If your opponent tried to draw like a haste threat or something like that, they probably couldn't get through the Siege Rhino. It also set up like racing opportunities for the fact that rhinos seem to come in multiples. Like Siege Rhino felt like Squadron Hawk. Like it was never seemed like the person playing the Obzon deck only ever had one Rhino. They had at least two, and in a lot of cases like three, and it was like absolutely miserable. And to give some context to like that format at the time too, like Green still had like Corsair Crewfix, which is like one of the best cards that you could have been playing at that time for the fact that like you could almost guaranteed hit your land drops, gain a little bit of life, and a 2/4 body was just amazing for a lot of the like aggressive decks. And again, your opponents would have to trade like lightning strikes and magma jets and stuff like that to get through a Corsair Crewfix, and then of course like on top of that, more than likely trading off with their creature as well. So Siege Rhino, obviously, very, very, very early on in its infancy, dominated Standard. Again, like being included in like at least four, in four decks in the top eight. three of which made the top four, and then winning the finals of that Pro Tour in a Pro Tour Cons Tarkir. And then slowly going on, like as the format evolved, obviously new sets came out. You know, we had the rest of like Khan's block with Fate Reforged, and then you had Dragons of Tarkir. Dragons kind of took over Mono Red, Atarka Red, all these other like super aggressive decks. But like when we got to the Worlds later that year, you know, 2015, 2016, like I believe both those years, like Siege Rhino was, you know, on the world stage, like competing and winning with Seth Manfield, and of course being played by, you know, the runner-up in that event as well. You know, 8 copies in the top eight, or 8 copies in the finals of the World Championship. Also, to like Siege Rhino's credit as well, like moving past just the standard format, where it was an obvious all-star. Like people were considering playing Obzon over Jund in modern, and while nowadays that doesn't like it seems kind of heinous nowadays because you have Ren 6, you have a lot of these really good like Jund spells where like if you're going to play a mid-range deck, Jund is just kind of like the tried and true formula for how you do it. Obzon had a really serious claim to like the mid-range throne in modern, where you had cards like Siege Rhino, like at your top end, you know, that just blocked a lot of the creatures in the format very well. Didn't obviously deal with like massive Tarmogoyfs very well. But, you know, in conjunction with like some of the efficient removal that we ended up getting later, and a lot of like some of the other threats, like you had people playing, you know, Siege Rhino, like in conjunction with like Tarmogoyf. If you had Lingering Souls, which was like a playable card in the format, where people to the point were playing like Is It Staticaster, and of course like shifts. Obviously, we know when different modern decks come into the forefront, like sideboard slots change, mainboard slots change, and Abzan kind of like being introduced to the format. I mean, even Reed Duke, you know, was who's known as like the Jund King, the Jund Master, played Abzan. You know, maybe not necessarily for Siege Rhino, but like Siege Rhino was definitely a driving factor in playing it over Jund, which is insane. Like this card was, you know, while at its face value, obviously we have like a bunch of other like broken 4 mana spells. Like we have Wilderness Reclamation and Fires of Invention are some of the cards that like really come to mind as being like super busted, even though they don't see as like nearly the play that they did way back when. You know, we have like these, you know, kind of flashier spells. Like we have like Shieldred's at 4 mana. Even like Kalidas for the Pioneer format is like better at 4 mana than Siege Rhino is, which is kind of a shame because this is probably one of my favorite cards that I've ever played, one of my favorite standard formats I ever played, so on and so forth. Siege Rhino was just like this was like the pinnacle. This was like a card everyone wanted to get banned, and this was a fair card. This was a very, very, very fair card. I mean, you know, like I said, it was this anomaly for mid-range decks where it played offense and defense. It was like the purest of mid-range cards. You know, played it played defense when you needed it to, and then it ended the game when you needed it to, and it shut the door very, very quickly. You know, faster than Jehovah's Witness visiting your house. Like it was just mind blowing. And again, like that was just like with one Rhino. If your opponent had two, like you were just never attacking. You know, they gained 6 life. They put a little bit of pressure on your life total just from you losing 3 life with Siege Rhino. And of course, like this is being a trampling threat, your opponent just couldn't like play Raise the Alarms and stuff like that, and like Lingering Souls like for modern, and like young pirate hide behind young pyromancers and that, because this card was just going to attack right through them. And sure, if you like threw your whole board away to get rid of one Rhino, your opponent still has 3 in their deck. You know, on top of like the other ways that like you can get some of the cards back. Like later we had like Grapple with the Past is like some very cheap options that you have that you can just go and grab a Siege Rhino from your graveyard. Of course, we have better options nowadays, but you know, like that's just the thing. That's just how it was. And you know, Siege Rhino will forever be, you know, a place in history for a lot of people. I mean, like we've had like Saffron Olive make tons of content around Siege Rhino and playing more copies of Siege Rhino, you know, from its time in standard, went to the modern format, you know, historic, whatnot, you know, just to name like one content creator. And then of course like all the memes from Siege Rhino, and just it's crazy. Like this card, while like not having an impact on like modern or pioneer, a little bit of an impact like in historic nowadays in 2023. This card almost 10 years ago was the pinnacle of Magic. Like this was just like one of the best cards that you could be playing. Had a legitimate place in, helping one of the other colors that's like known for mid range, but definitely not known for mid range, like Jund, into just blowing it wide open and having a legitimate argument for like, hey, you should play green, black, white over green, black, red. It's crazy. Like this card was amazing, and I can sing its praises all day. I mean, like you look at, Pro Tours like after the fact, like the non-modern Pro Tours, because Fate Reforged, the next set after Khans of Tarkir ended up being a modern format, and we just had like Amulet Titan and Infect and stuff like that, and just a bunch of gross stuff. I believe even Splinter Twin was still legal. Pod, I think, was banned. Splinter Twin was still legal, and I think Splinter Twin ended up winning that event. But any sort of like standard tournament that ended up happening, people playing like modern GPs, and I believe even like that Pro Tour Fate Reforge, like this card just kept showing up. Like while modern, it might not have like necessarily panned out, like it didn't reach definitely the heights that it did in standard. This card was just super impactful in that way. Just kept showing up. Eventually, I believe is like a two-time world champion as well. This card's great. So what the heck happened to it? After I just sang its praises for like the last 10 minutes, what happened to it? If it was really that good, why isn't it good now? Well, as I alluded to earlier, this card is definitely power crept. While a 4/5 body for 4 is it's still impressive. Like stats wise, that's still pretty big. We do have a bunch of 4 mana 6/6s, some with downside, some just absolutely no downside. You have cards like Questing Beast that have a wall of text for 4 mana. That is like relevant and not relevant all at the same time. And Siege Rhino's like offensive and defensive capabilities, like its bread and butter, just really isn't worth it, especially now with a card like Shieldred. Like, absolutely now, like, if there was a time for Siege Rhino to, come back as, like, maybe in some sort of, like, black-white, like, splash green, like, mid-range deck, and that's just not going to happen with in any black based deck as long as Shieldred is legal in the format. The fact that Shieldred is going to put pressure on your opponent's life total, maybe not the immediate pressure that Siege Rhino can generate by coming into play, but if your opponent doesn't have an answer for Shieldred, it is absolutely brutal. And if they have to like draw more cards, like find it, then they end up losing more life, and then eventually just over the course of the game, you gaining 2 life, your opponent not putting pressure on you, you're going to end the game. And Siege Rhino doesn't have that capability of just like gaining that additional value as it sits on the battlefield outside of itself. You have people that play like Conjurer's Closet type effects, like just bounce it, bring it into play, exile it, come back, so on and so forth to like re-trigger it, Panharmonicons and stuff like that, just to double up on those triggers, and there like Siege Rhino could definitely outpace a Shieldred, but by itself, and that's kind of what we base like these mid-range cards are, is like by themselves, like how do they impact a game? And there's just like a very 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 high floor and an even higher ceiling for Shieldred than there is Siege Rhino. So definitely like making a comeback in like a Pioneer format, or really any format that Shieldred is legal in, is not possible. Like that door is now firmly shut on Siege Rhino. Granted, that's not going to stop people from playing this card. I definitely don't think it's completely laughable to play this, but there's so many better mid-range options. Like I said, just to name a few of them. If you want to be aggressive, you have a lot of other cards that have like more power, and like Steel Leaf Champion. You have cards like Questing Beast, who again do a ton of things for 4 mana. You have like Nullhide Ferox, which stops you from like casting non-creature spells, but like it also has hexproof and things like that. You just have all these creatures that have bigger power, bigger toughness. They're more aggressive. They could, in a way, do more on defense as well, just by being a lot bigger. And the buffering your life total really isn't that much more relevant, just because like we don't see a lot of like mono red decks anymore really in Pioneer, because of the rise of like Rakdos midrange and even like the Lotus Field decks and stuff like that. It seems to be a lot harder for aggressive decks, where like once upon a time in Pioneer, uh, funny because that card's banned in Pioneer. Once upon a time, the Atarka red decks, the uh, blue white, heroic decks were very powerful because they beat mono green, and then like mono green's still popular, and those decks aren't played anymore. Which hint hint, those are going to be possibly in a future video as well. So Siege Rhino really just doesn't have a home in the one format that Siege Rhino would definitely, probably have a place in a format where like a mid-range deck is the best deck in the format. Siege Rhino's never going to see play. And unfortunately for our big Rhino horny boy, he's not going to make it. Uh, it's unfortunate. He's probably stuck to the, casual tables, the 500s, so on and so forth. But, that is ultimately why Siege Rhino is not playable anymore in really any format, minus like historic, seeing some like fringe play and stuff. So, yeah, that is the tragic downfall and why nobody plays Siege Rhino in any format, really. If you enjoyed the video, of course, and you want to see more videos like this, I have a few other cards in mind that I want to do. Of course, like still partly gauging some interest because I know that Siege Rhino is kind of like a polarizing card for Magic players. Again, like if you played back in like the mid 2010s, this card is either very triggering to you and just again like your opponent plays like 3 Siege Rhinos against you, they use all their removal and then like you just end up losing the game nearly on the spot. Or it was like your best friend because you played 3 Siege Rhinos and you saw your opponent have an aneurysm across from you and just bang their head off the table. So again, if this videos like this interest you, and of course like any of the other like non-deck techy slash like gameplay videos interest you, please be sure to leave a like on those videos. Comment down below if there's other specific cards or decks that you want to see on those respective videos. It'll help me out a lot. Again, like I have some stuff in the pipeline, stuff that I eventually want to get to, but by and large, I want to give the people what they want. So if there's anything specific, please let me know in the comments of the video. And that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.